Stellar Blade Blood Rain is not just a sequel reveal. It is Shift Up trying to prove that Stellar Blade can become a real franchise without being carried by the same protagonist, the same setting, or the same PlayStation association. And that is where this gets interesting, because the basic version of this story is simple. Stellar Blade got a sequel, it has a new girl and it looks cool. That is fine for a news post, but for this channel, that's just too basic. The better version is this. Blood Rain is the first real franchise test for Shift Up. The first Stellar Blade proved the studio could get attention. Now Blood Rain has to prove the studio can keep trust. That is a different game. So today I'm putting Stellar Blade Blood Rain through the player respect test. Not as a rant, not as blind hype, as an audit. We are looking at whether this reveal respects the player's money, time, ownership, intelligence, trust, and attention. Because trailer hype is easy, player respect is harder. The promise of Stellar Blade Blood Rain is not small. This trailer is selling a new chapter in the Stellar Blade universe, and the protagonist named Evie, a darker cyberpunk city, a more physical combat style, and a bigger future for the IP. That matters because this does not look like Shift Up is making Stellar Blade 1.5. This looks like Shift Up is trying to build a wider universe, and that is a real move. A first game can hit because of novelty. A sequel has to prove there is more under the surface. That's the test. Because players liked Eve. They liked the combat, the style, the music. Players liked the feeling that Stellar Blade had its own identity in a market full of safe, sanded down action games. So when Shift Up comes back and says, here's a new protagonist, that's not a small choice. That is the studio asking players to transfer trust. And trust does not transfer automatically. You have to earn it again. And that is where Evie becomes the first big player respect question. The issue is not that Stellar Blade has a new protagonist. The issue is whether Shift Up understands why players connected with the first one. Because players do not hate new characters by default. They hate when studios treat attachment like a disposable asset. They hate when a company builds emotional investment that acts like the audience should just accept a swap with no friction. So the problem here is clear. Shift Up is saying Stellar Blade is bigger than Eve. Now the studio has to prove it. And that's dangerous. Not bad, but just dangerous. Because that is the stage where a studio can level up into a serious franchise owner. Or it can overplay its hand. I've seen this happen in games, movies, anime, all of it. The first entry hits because it feels focused. Then the sequel tries to expand the world, add more lore, add characters, politics, add systems, and suddenly the clean thing people like gets buried under franchise plans. That's the trap. Expansion is not automatically growth. Sometimes expansion is just clutter wearing a nice jacket. So Blood Rain's promise is exciting, but it also comes with pressure. Now let's talk about what the trailer actually shows. The trailer does a few smart things. First, Evie does not just look like Eve with a different hairstyle. That matters. If you're going to introduce a new protagonist, they need their own presence, their own movement, combat rhythm, and reason to exist. And from what the trailer shows, Evie seems built around a more physical, brawler-heavy style. You see the mechanical gauntlet, the punches and the kicks. You see close-range movement. You still get the stylish action identity, but the focus looks different. That's crucial, because a lazy sequel changes the wrapper. A better sequel changes the feel. And Blood Rain looks like it wants to keep the speed, impact, and flash of Stellar Blade while giving Evie her own combat language. That phrase matters. Combat language. Because a character should not just look different. They should fight different, move different. They should force you to approach the game slightly differently. That is how a sequel earns a new lead. Not by saying, trust us, by showing the player this person brings something new to the table. The setting shift is also doing a lot of work. The first Stellar Blade had a lonely post-apocalyptic feel. Broken areas, ruined spaces, hostile environments. Blood Rain looks heavier on the rain, neon, crowded city identity. Things like trains, streets, alleys, parks, crowds, heavy rain. That changes the pressure. The first game felt like you were walking through the remains of a broken world. Blood Rain looks like the broken world learned how to wear neon and pretend everything is fine. That is a strong visual direction, because a city gives the story more room. You can have more factions. Well, you have civilians, public fear, surveillance, propaganda, class divide, underground resistance. And now, to be clear, I'm not saying all of that is confirmed. I'm saying the trailer is visually pointing toward a more political, crowded, and watched world. And that makes the sequel feel bigger. Not just bigger as in more enemies and more explosions. Bigger as in more social pressure, more systems, more people affected by what is happening. That is the kind of expansion that can actually justify a sequel. But there's also a risk. The trailer throws out terms like Nexus Sector, Scarlet Sin, Angel, Cana, C3 Sync, and False Rain. That sounds interesting. It also sounds like the kind of lore that can either pull people in or push people out. This is where the writing has to be clean, because style gets attention, but clarity keeps attention. Blood Rain cannot just drown players in cool phrases. It has to make those phrases mean something. The Scarlet Sin sounds like the center of the conflict. The False Rain shall cease sounds like the title is not just aesthetic. Rain might be a system, a belief, a threat, a control system, a biological event, a technological process. Again, that's just trailer analysis, not confirmed. But the trailer is clearly treating rain like more than weather, and that's good. That gives the game a hook. But Shift Up has to be careful, because players will tolerate mystery, but they will not tolerate confusion pretending to be depth. Now, let's turn to the system, because this is a bigger point. Blood Rain is not just a creative decision, it is a business decision. This is where the industry layer matters. The first Stellar Raid had a strong PlayStation association. Blood Rain looks different. The official trailer is from Shift Up's channel, and the footage is captured with in-game, on PC. That does not mean we should jump out the window and say, this is coming everywhere day one. This is how people turn trailer analysis into misinformation. The safer point is stronger anyway. The publishing situation looks different, and Shift Up appears to be taking more control over the franchise. That's the real story. If Stellar Blade has the proof of concept, Blood Rain is the independence test. The first game proved Shift Up can make a major action game people cared about. The sequel has to prove they can manage the IP, expand the world, handle expectations, market the game clearly, and keep player trust without leaning on the exact same setup. This is a bigger test than people think, because modern studios do not just want to make games. They want to own IP. They want leverage. They want franchises. They want characters, worlds, sequels, collaborations, merch, PC expansions, console expansions, and long-term audience control. That is the business game. And honestly, I do not blame a studio for wanting that. Ownership does matter, especially now. If a studio creates something valuable, it makes sense for them to want more control over the future. But player respect depends on how they handle that control. Because when a studio gets a major win, the temptation is always there. Stretch the brand too fast. Confuse expansion with depth. Overreact the identity. Treat goodwill like a permanent resource. Goodwill is not permanent. It is a battery. Every unclear decision drains it. Every strong decision charges it. That is the system Blood Rain is entering. Shift Up is not just releasing a trailer. They are entering the dangerous stage of success. Players are no longer only judging the game. They are judging the studio's future. That is a heavy place to be. Because when players root for a studio, it creates power, but it also creates pressure. People are not just saying this looks cool. They are saying we want Shift Up to win. That is a different kind of attachment. And it can turn fast. The audience that praises your independence will audit your decisions harder. The same audience that celebrates your style will inspect your trailer frame by frame. The same audience that says you respect players will expect you to keep proving it. This is the modern trailer cycle. Players do not just want to watch reveals anymore. They audit them. They look for AI artifacts. They look for censorship signs. They look for downgrades, corporate weirdness, and platform messaging. They look for whether the studio is being clean or slippery. That's not always fair. Sometimes players reach. Sometimes the internet turns one blurry frame into a courtroom case. But the bigger point is still real. Trust is now part of the reveal. Not after launch, not after reviews, at the trailer stage. That is a system, and Blood Rain is already inside of it. Now let's get to the player cost, because this is where we separate hype from accountability. Money. Does Blood Rain respect what players might pay for? Right now this is under review. The trailer shows enough to make the sequel feel like it has a reason to exist. A new protagonist, a new setting, different combat identity, bigger franchise direction, all that stuff is good. Because if a sequel is going to ask for a full price, it should not feel like a reskin. It should bring a real change. But the money respect test cannot be passed by a trailer alone. Players need clear platform messaging, clear edition structure, clear launch expectations, clear monetization. No weird confusion. No vague premium upgrade nonsense. No, trust us bro rollout. The trailer builds interest. The business model will decide whether that interest turns into respect. Next is time. Does Blood Rain respect the player's time? That's also under review. The good sign is that the combat looks direct and active. It looks like the game is still built around meaningful action instead of menu labor. That matters, because too many modern games waste your time and call it content. They give you chores, bloated maps. They give you upgrade materials for upgrade materials. They give you systems that exist to slow you down. Stellar Blade's strength was that it knew how to be stylish and focused. Blood Rain needs to protect that. A bigger city should not automatically mean a bloated checklist. Expansion should give players more meaningful things to do, not more icons to clean off the screen after work. Does Blood Rain respect player ownership? Right now, there's not enough information for this, but this is a crucial category. Players need to know what they are buying, where they can play it, and where the access is stable. The PC footage detail matters because it signals a wider technical direction, but it does not answer everything. If Shift Up is taking more control, that control should translate into a clear communication, not platform fog, not exclusivity confusion, not weird rollout language. Player ownership starts with honesty. Tell players what the game is. Tell players where it is going. Tell players what is confirmed. Do not let hype channels do the messaging for you. Now, does the reveal respect players' intelligence? This is mixed, but it's leaning towards positive. The trailer gives players things to analyze. The new protagonist is distinct. The combat shift is visible. The setting has a strong identity. The title has meaning beyond style. That respects attention. It gives people material. But the lore language could become a problem in the final game if the final game hides basic story clarity behind cool terms. Players are not dumb. They can handle complex worlds. What they reject is fake depth. If Scarlet Sin and False Rain matter, make them matter. Do not just sprinkle terms around like seasoning. Expect players to feel full. This next one is the big one. Does Blood Rain respect trust? Right now I would call this mixed. Shift Up has earned attention. They have earned curiosity. They have earned a level of goodwill. But trust is not the same as hype. The new protagonist is a trust test. The combat shift is a trust test. The setting change is a trust test. The Sony angle is a trust test. The AI suspicion layer is a trust test. The platform messaging is a trust test. Everything about this sequel is asking players to accept a new phase. That can work. But Shift Up has to be clean. Clean beats clever here. Clear about what Eevee adds, what changed, what stayed. Clear about why this is not just a brand extension. Clear about why players should follow this franchise into the next stage. Does Blood Rain respect attention? This is the strongest category so far. The trailer does its job. It gives you visual identity. It gives you music, combat, mystery. It gives you a new lead. It gives you enough to talk about without revealing everything. That's how you sell a sequel reveal. Not by dumping a full wiki page on the audience, but by not by hiding so much that nobody knows what they watched, but by giving players a clear signal. This is still Stellar Blade, but the pressure has changed. That is effective. The trailer earns attention. Now the game has to justify keeping it. The verdict. So does Stellar Blade respect the player? Right now my verdict is still under review. But if I had to give a player respect score, it would be like a 7 out of 10. This is not a review of the game, mind you. The game is not out. This is a review of the reveal. And as a reveal, it does several things right. It shows that Shift Up is not scared to evolve the IP. It gives Evie her own combat identity. It changes the setting enough to make the sequel feel larger. It keeps the style recognizable. It creates real questions without showing everything. But the risk is also clear. A new protagonist can either expand the franchise or fracture the audience. A bigger city can either create depth or create bloat. A more independent publishing direction can either give Shift Up more control or create messaging confusion. A lore-heavy trailer can either build mystery or hide basic clarity. And player goodwill can either become a foundation or a trap. That is the core conflict. Can Shift Up expand Stellar Blade without breaking the thing that made people care? That's the video, that's the newsletter, and that's the real story. Because Blood Rain does not have to be safer than Stellar Blade. It has to be clear. Clear about Evie, the world, the combat, the platform situation, and the studio's direction. Clear about why this franchise deserves the trust players are already giving it. And that is a part of a lot of companies miss. Players can accept change, a new lead, new setting, a different combat rhythm. But players need to feel like the studio respects the connection they already had. You cannot build trust with one game and then act surprised when people ask questions about the next one. That is not entitlement. That is investment. Players invested attention, money, time, identity into this game. So when Shift Up comes back with Blood Rain, players are not just asking, does this look cool? They're asking, do you still know what made this matter? That is a player respect test. And right now, Blood Rain passes the attention test. It passes the curiosity test, the style test. But the trust test is still open. Shift Up has the opportunity. Now they need the execution. Here's the bottom line though. Stellar Blade Blood Rain is bigger than a sequel reveal. It is Shift Up trying to turn one major win into a real franchise. That's exciting, but it's also risky. Because the moment the studio starts expanding a world, changing the lead, shifting the combat, and taking more control over the IP, the player respect test gets harder. Blood Rain has my attention. Now it has to earn my trust.
Oh, hey, glad you're still here. I've, just finished syncing the next set of files for you. They're right over there on the screen. Take a look and, catch ya in the next one.